the night she appeared at the edge of Caleb Rourke's land. The wind was cutting across the plains like a blade, carrying dust, old memories, and the smell of coming rain. The ranch stretched wide and lonely beneath a sky bruised purple by sunset, fences creaking softly as if whispering secrets to the dark. Caleb had lived on this land for nearly 20 years alone, long enough to believe nothing unexpected ever crossed his path anymore. The world had taught him that surprises only brought pain, so he had learned to keep his gates closed, both the wooden ones and the ones around his heart. That night he was locking up the barn when he saw her. She stood just beyond the fence line, thin as a shadow, clothes torn and soaked with sweat, her hair tangled by wind and fear. She didn't wave or call out. She just stood there, as if stepping any closer might shatter her. Caleb froze. Out here strangers didn't wander in by accident. The nearest town was miles away, and anyone who came this far usually came for a reason, none of them good. His hand instinctively moved toward the rifle resting against the barn wall, but something stopped him. It wasn't pity. It wasn't curiosity. It was the look in her eyes when she finally lifted her face toward him. They weren't begging. They weren't calculating. They were hollow, like someone who had already lost everything and didn't expect kindness to exist anymore. He took a slow breath and stepped forward, boots crunching on gravel. "You lost?" he asked, his voice rough from years of silence. She shook her head once, barely. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse, fragile, as if it might break if she used it too much. "I'm just tired." The words carried more weight than they should have, like exhaustion had settled into her bones. Caleb studied her carefully. No visible weapon, no obvious threat, just a woman standing at the edge of his world, barely holding herself together. He unlocked the gate without another word and motioned her inside. "You can rest in the bunkhouse," he said. "Food's warm, water's clean." He didn't ask her name, didn't ask where she came from. He'd learned long ago that questions sometimes scared people away, and something told him she'd already run far enough. Inside the bunkhouse, the warmth hit her like a wave. She nearly collapsed as soon as the door closed behind her. Caleb caught her just in time, steadying her without pulling her too close. He noticed the bruises then, old and new, layered like history written into her skin. He set her down gently and brought her water. She drank like she hadn't tasted it in days. When he handed her a plate of food, she hesitated, eyes filling as if she didn't trust it to be real. "It's okay," he said quietly. "No one's taking it back." She nodded and ate slowly, each bite careful, deliberate, like survival itself had become a discipline. Caleb left her alone after that, lighting a lantern and sitting outside on the porch, staring into the night. He told himself he'd done the right thing. He always helped when he could. But this felt different. There was a tension in his chest he couldn't explain, a tightening that reminded him of things he'd buried deep, names, faces, promises broken by time. The ranch was supposed to be quiet, safe, free of the past. Yet somehow, without saying a word, this woman had disturbed that fragile peace. Hours later, when the storm finally broke and rain drummed against the tin roof, Caleb heard the door creak open behind him. She stepped out, wrapped in a blanket, looking smaller somehow, but steadier. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "You can stay as long as you need," he replied. No rules, no pressure. She swallowed hard at that, like the idea of freedom was unfamiliar. She sat on the far end of the porch, watching the rain fall over the fields. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Silence stretched between them, comfortable but charged. That was when she whispered it. At first, Caleb thought he'd imagined it, a trick of the rain and wind. But then she said it again, softer this time, like speaking it aloud might summon something she wasn't ready to face. A single name, one name, and the moment it reached his ears, the world seemed to tilt beneath him. His chest tightened violently, breath catching as if he'd been struck. No one had spoken that name to him in over 15 years. No one alive was supposed to know it. His hands clenched into fists as memories surged back. Blood on dirt, sirens screaming in the distance, a younger version of himself making a choice that could never be undone. He turned slowly toward her. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. She flinched, realizing too late what she'd done. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. "I didn't hear it," she said. "I lived it." Her eyes met his, and in them he saw fear, yes, but also recognition, as if she had been waiting for this moment longer than he had. The rain intensified, thunder rolling across the sky like a warning. Caleb stood abruptly. pacing the length of the porch as if movement might keep the past from catching him. That name wasn't just a memory. It was a wound, one that had cost lives, one that had forced him to disappear. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally. "If you know that name, you're not safe." She shook her head, tears slipping free. "I was never safe," she replied. "That's why I came." The weight of her words settled heavily between them. Caleb realized then that taking her in without questions had been the easy part. What came next? The truth, the consequences, the people that name would attract, would test everything he believed about solitude, redemption, and whether a man could outrun who he once was. As the storm raged on, Caleb understood one undeniable truth. The quiet life he'd built was over, and this was only the beginning. If this story has pulled you in, if you feel the mystery tightening and want to know what that name truly means, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. What comes next will change everything. The rain had stopped by morning, but the silence it left behind was heavier than the storm itself, settling over the ranch like a held breath. Caleb hadn't slept. He stood at the kitchen window as dawn painted the fields gold, replaying that single whispered name again and again in his mind, each repetition peeling back layers of a past he had sworn never to touch. When he finally turned, she was standing in the doorway, already awake, eyes rimmed red but steady, as if she had accepted long ago that this moment would come. He didn't ask her to sit. He didn't offer coffee. He simply said, "You know who I was," and the words tasted bitter, unfinished. She nodded slowly. "I know who you tried to stop being," she replied, and that was somehow worse. The name she had spoken the night before wasn't just tied to a man. It was tied to a firestorm of violence, betrayal, and blood that had once torn through an entire county, leaving graves, broken families, and one survivor who vanished without a trace. Caleb Rourke had not always been a rancher. Once he had been something far more dangerous, someone people feared enough to say his name in whispers, until even that became too risky. She told him her story in fragments at first, like someone testing thin ice. Her name was Eliza. She had been a child when everything fell apart, hidden in the back of a truck, watching flames swallow the only home she'd ever known. The men responsible were ghosts now, dead or imprisoned. But one name had followed her through foster homes, runaway nights, and years of searching. She hadn't known what she would do if she ever found him. She only knew she needed answers. Caleb listened without interrupting, every word driving nails into the coffin of the life he'd built. He remembered that night clearly, the ambush, the deal gone wrong, the moment he chose to turn against his own people to save someone who couldn't save herself. He remembered pulling a little girl from the wreckage and handing her to a deputy, believing that was the end of it, believing that was enough. He had been wrong. "They're looking for me," Eliza said quietly. "The ones who survived. They think I know where you are." That was when the distant engine noise reached Caleb's ears, low and deliberate, cutting through the calm. He stepped onto the porch and scanned the horizon. 2 vehicles, black, dust trailing behind them like a warning. He didn't panic. Panic was for people who still had something to lose. He went back inside and opened the floorboard beneath the old rug, revealing weapons he had hoped never to touch again. "You should have kept running," he said, loading with practiced ease. Eliza shook her head. "I ran my whole life," she answered. "I'm tired." Something shifted in him then, something old and dangerous waking up. But this time it wasn't fueled by rage. It was fueled by resolve. The men arrived just before noon. They didn't knock. They spread out, confident, careless, assuming the rancher was exactly what he appeared to be, old, alone, harmless. Caleb stepped out to meet them, hands visible, posture relaxed, and for a brief moment they didn't recognize him. Then one of them did. The color drained from his face. "It's you," he whispered, stepping back. Caleb smiled faintly. "You shouldn't have come," he said, and the standoff ended almost as soon as it began. The ranch echoed with gunfire, sharp and final, dust exploding from the ground, windows shattering, history closing in on itself. When it was over, the fields were quiet again. But the cost was written into the earth. Eliza emerged slowly, heart pounding, eyes wide. Caleb was wounded, blood seeping through his shirt, but he was standing alive. She rushed to him, hands shaking as she pressed cloth against the wound. "Why?" she asked through tears. "Why protect me after everything?" He met her gaze, voice low but sure. "Because I failed you once," he said. and I don't get many chances to do something. Right, sirens wailed in the distance, this time called by Caleb himself. He wasn't running anymore. When the authorities arrived, he gave his name freely. The real one, the one he'd buried. He told them everything. Months later, the ranch looked different. Fences repaired, windows replaced. The land still carried scars, but it breathed again. Caleb's sentence was lighter than anyone expected. Old deals, old testimonies, old enemies finally silenced. When he returned, Eliza was waiting. She hadn't left. She never planned to. Together they rebuilt, not as ghosts bound by the past, but as survivors who had finally stopped running. The name that once brought fear no longer held power. It was just a reminder of how far they'd come. And if this story moved you, if you believe even the darkest past can lead to redemption, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Because stories like this remind us that sometimes the answers we're searching for don't destroy us. They save us.